Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to MT Fridays. I'm Tahitia,
And I'm Melonya.
and we talk about everything under the sun. We feel the brain drain, one unscripted conversation at a time. And we are so happy to be here with you on a Friday. Even though I'm going to say this, it's dreary where I am in New Jersey. Um,
It's sunny where I am. You can see the sun beaming on me today. Yay!
it's about time. I love that for you.
Thank you.
It has
Me
been
too.
cold where you are. Where I am, it's like raining and flash flooding. But I feel like an angel with this glow above me. I usually turn the overhead light off, but I'll just honor Cory Booker with that glow. I've seen some pictures of him like an angel where he's like on the set floor. So much to talk about today. Where do you come into the table with?
Well, I am coming into the table with rest. I after our last session last week, and I became so heated, I thought to myself, "You need some rest, right?" And so tomorrow is a big national protest movement, and a lot of Black folks are sitting this one out, and everything that has gone on has made me understand that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon in terms of what we're going through right now. And I wasn't handling it very well. I was drinking and just, just really succumbing to the stress. And so I am determined to live a balanced life and to have joyful moments and periods of rest as we move forward. So that's what I'm talking about today.
I love that. And I'm talking about something similar, but maybe a little bit different. I asked, or like, I felt like we talk a lot about like really dark stuff recently. And part of that is because of the political climate we're in. And Melania and I are both in the US. And I think I wanted to see like what positive news is going on out there. And so I kind of like I didn't poke around, but I literally just Googled like positive news today and it brought up a couple of sites. And I'm going to reflect on my sort of like thoughts around the sites that it brought up and the stories it brought up. The other thing, because I love to talk about health stuff, I did want to talk a little bit about something that's going on personally with me. And then if we have time, dating when you're not the perfect catch. I would love to have a conversation about that because I'm a little bit older, and a little bit sickly. And like, what is it like to like, because I did think like the world in chaos, like who's gonna like find your body? Like if something happens, if you're a single person. So, because I know we've talked about that personally before.
There goes that
I need a
lightness of being. Who's going to find your body when the apocalypse happens?
I guess it doesn't like, I guess it doesn't matter because I mean, you don't care, you're dead, so but
and,
those are my things.
and so let us begin, shall we?
Let's go.
All right. Well, I don't even know how to follow that. So, rest. I was watching one of my favorite these days YouTube content creators. Her name is Tabitha, and she had on this gentleman. She had she shares videos of folks, and he was talking about Black folks, and he used the term rest as resistance,
Mm.
and that really stuck with me. It resonated with me, even though I was still raging and raging and raging. But it's I was like, there's some real truth to that. There's some value in that type of that type of mindset. And so again, yet last week, really, our podcast last week really kind of stuck with me because I felt really heated, and I thought to myself, you can't, you
Well,
know,
and just in your defense, I was a contrarian and like I was we battled a little bit.
right? Yeah, and but here's the thing. Here's the other thing too. People are going to have differing opinions, right? And I, I know that I have no tolerance for different opinions. Okay, no,
You
I
just
do.
you just laid it right out there. You're like,
But
I
I
don't
mean,
have any
on some
tolerance.
things I do. On some things I can go, well, let's see, let me hear you out. But there are some things that are going on now that I draw a line at. I see it as black and white. That being said, um, we have to find a way in our lives, in our personal lives, not just political, to be able to hear somebody else's side and not be incensed by it, not have this visceral attack, kind of shut down, defensive type of posture and mindset. And so I was paying attention. I always, like I said, I pay attention to my algorithms. I live on YouTube, and I was looking at the things that it was like what you should be outraged about. And before I would click on it, and now I'm like, nope, I don't feel like being outraged today. This is what's going to drag us to the end. Oh, click. I'm not going to click on that. And I'm like, I'm not going to fuel my day with things that keep me enraged because I don't have the stamina for it. I think you're living on cortisol all the time. So I'm eating, I was drinking, which is never good for me. Okay. And so I'm like, we got to do something different, you know.
I love what you're talking about because it started me thinking about like when did we get so ragey with each other? When did we get so where the headlines were more like you like very and I think I can remember this happening with the news and like and news feeds, and I can. This is not fact. I don't have any evidence for this, but I almost see like this correlation between like how do you get clicks on social media, and then how do you get clicks in news, right? So as social media begins to take off, we see our news headlines start to shift towards like more grab your attention, like more like the news, like because I'll see like things from like because I'm a bit cheesy. Like I'll see like People magazine posts or like stuff like that, and they're always like, "You won't believe what she did." And there was a shift from when like, and then you click it, and it's like she went to the grocery store, and you're like all tweaked up to like be like, "Oh my gosh," and like that, like up and down. You're absolutely right. Is so detrimental to human beings. 'Cause it's almost like the lion was chasing you or you were gonna go after something, and then you're like, "Oh, that's not really a story." It's either that or it's a story that's so horrific, you're like, "That's not the right title for that." Um, but it does, like, it plays on all of your emotions. Like, I feel like sometimes some of those titles, like, I had a marriage to it, and, like, and I divorced it at the end, but I went through all the emotions, like and some of them I just choose because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, this is gonna be a better happy story." Like, I wanted to know, like, how did Cory Booker, like, seriously, how did he do that talk for so long? So I was like, "Oh, I wanna know know because something flashed up and it was like, how Cory Booker prepared his body. And I was like, "Ooh, it's gonna say he wore a catheter and, like, secretly was, like, eating, like, power bites." And it was just like he got prepared by just, like, slowly parsing down how much he was eating. And I was like, "This wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be." But my body went through all of that. I also wonder, like, with everything that's going on, if all this up and down that we do isn't impacting our health. Like, I know you and I do the up and down, right? Because for this podcast and for other things that we do for our work. And I feel physically it's taking a toll on my body. Like, I wonder if some of this stuff that I'm going through is not from as the guy who wrote the Your Body Keeps Score book, right? Like, if that isn't compounding this. So that's why I too was like, I need to think about something positive because like we might be harming ourselves with this, but you can't like check out. That's the
Yeah.
other problem. So
And I think it's really a balance. I think that there's some content creators and there's some, I look at I check the New York Times every day. I check, ground news every day. And I pick what I want to focus on. I pick things that legislatively impact us, right? And someone gave some advice early on to say choose what it is you're going to focus on, because every day it's a new assault, right? And
mm,
so what do you do? And so these days I'm going to take controls for 2 seconds. These days I'm focused on my garden, right? I made a commitment, because I really do, and I encourage everyone to do that. We have all of these tariffs coming down the pike. We potentially may have
I thought we
disrupt.
were talking about happy things.
No, it is. I mean,
No,
it is
yeah,
for
no, it
me.
is. It
You
is.
know, but I'm saying, because of that, because we know that our farming industry is being impacted by deportations and things of that nature. There very well may be food insecurities, right? That could be a reality. And so I decided to do some elevated vegetable garden. And so it has been, and I started 2 weeks ago, and that's what's been growing thus far. That the
I
big
am so jealous of your I say that to you, I think, with every picture you show me, but I am so jealous of your garden.
Well, you know what? It's my garden's on my dining room table, and here's the thing about it all. I, you know, to be honest with you, I don't know what I'm doing.
So
Like,
you need gardening if anyone has gardening advice,
go
pop it in the chat.
because I'm
What do you
because
mean you don't know what
those
you're
those
doing? It
big
looks like
plants.
it's happening.
No, those big plants are up front are beans. They need to grow
Okay.
on a vine, right? And so I'm doing
Oh.
raised beds, and I'm like, how am I going to keep this thing when we get really big winds from not blowing my beans away? I'm like, I'm over my head right now, right? Because I'm not doing it in the ground, because my backyard is a complete disaster, right? So but it brings me joy. I felt like a little child every morning and every night and throughout the day. I'm like looking to see what sprouts, and it's so amazing to see life, right? To see things grow. That wasn't there this morning, but it's there now. A few hours later, what was this big, by the end of the day is that big. And
It's like a child that can't talk back.
it's magic. It's like it feels like magic. And so I'm kind of trying to do things that bring in magic, right? I binge watched The Residence on Netflix, which is really good. It's a Shonda Rhimes kind of murder
Oh,
mystery
yeah,
in the
that was
White House.
funny.
Yeah, that was really good. And I just this morning watched a little of Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle has been getting a lot of smoke because I think because she married Harry, and folks are not really ever going to be happy about that. Okay. But she has a show on Netflix, kind of a home cooking decor kind of, and people were kind of down on her for that, but I'm like, I liked her. I liked her from Suits, when she played in Suits, and I'm like, let's give her a chance, right? And so, yeah, I'm just doing things that bring me kind of joy, resting, when I feel tired, I'll go to bed a little earlier, or I'll take a nap, or so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at these days.
I don't know how you did. Now I want to be truthful. You are the better controls host than I am, because I'm supposed to be host today, and Melania lovingly she's moving the things around. Whenever she's host, or not host, but like the in control, she's like putting notes up for y'all, and like she's like, today we're talking about this. All I knew how to do was drop it in the chat. I'm like, we are talking about joy and rest. And I was like, I can't even type rest fast enough. So out of the two of us, if you're going to hire a coach who's going to take like amazing notes and be able to manipulate those screens, it's you all the way.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to get breathless and just be anxious.
You
Yeah.
know what? I look. I need some work, so hire me. I'll be your tech person. That's
Support
all.
Black women.
Please. Yeah. So
We're
that's what.
getting fired or laid off or discriminated against all the time. Yeah, so support Black women. We both coach.
Yes, we do.
Have a coaching session.
Yes, yes. But but that's where I am, and so I put the drinking aside. I'm like I said, I'm happy for spring because I can walk more with my dog and hear the birds, and I'm trying to train my dog too. That's stress, okay? I'm trying to change our pulling sessions called walks into pleasant walks, right? I've had her for 5 years now, and I do training for a living. I'm a horrible animal trainer, but we're making our way. So I have always, I think, envisioned a slow life, right? And I want to embrace that, whatever that might look like for me right now.
It's interesting you mentioned a slow, relaxed life. And I did see something recently that said in the US, we tend to work more hours than other countries. I think it was sort of like we work like on average 80 hours. And that was counting in things like overtime, things like work at home, and then if you think about the fact that when it comes to work, we think about work when we're home. We don't count that as like working time. But I know when I was a bedside nurse, I used to hear call bells like in my sleep,
Mm.
because like work was constantly on my mind. And you do spend the majority of your day light hours or night light or half the day at work. So how do you find that rest? How do you resettle your mind? And then it feels like to be a good citizen and a good person in society, how do you put time aside for that too, right? So like, how do you maintain those boundaries? You say this to me all the time: boundaries, sister, boundaries, keep your boundaries. I'm bad at boundaries for some people. Those people know who they are.
You know who you are.
Yeah. And like, so how do you do this? Because rest is so important. And I absolutely agree with you. I think we all need more rest and more tips on how to relax. So what are other people doing? I'll throw this out if anybody's listening. What are other people doing to create rest, to create that space? Because there's a lot going on in our politics, job wise. We're looking at, I don't want to say possibly a recession. It looks like most likely a recession. We didn't want to talk sad things, but more tariffs came out. So like how are we going to create ways to kind of give ourselves a rest? That's kind of what Melania brought to the table today, and relief. And the gardening thing is perfect because I think they say plants bring like this. What is it? They trigger something in our bodies when we see something growing and greenery besides oxygen.
Yeah,
Um,
but for me, it feels like magic. Like I said, I when I started my indoor and these have to be transported outside. But when I started them, you have this little plastic top on it, cover, this clear cover that helps to keep moisture and things in, right? And so, like I said, you might in the morning you might not see anything, and then you come back in the afternoon and you see something poking up, right? And 2 days later, it's hitting the top of the plastic, and you got to take it off. And I mean, and then I kind of shift them because they don't have direct light on top of them, so they move towards the light, and so they're leaning this way. So I'll turn them around, but they're so, and it just reminds me on a philosophical level just how sensitive and delicate life is, right? And the source of life for these plants, I'm looking at them now, is light, right? And water, but they move towards life. And I think that as a society is what we need to move towards. I'm a tree hugging, you know mother nature loving kind of being, right? And I think that part of the stress that we feel is that we have moved away from nature. We've moved away from a life that sustains life, right? And so we're kind of growing ourselves in darkness, both
Mm.
figuratively and literally. And so I have made a decision to just really kind of focus on the little projects that I have at home, and not look at them as unfinished projects that have been annoying me, but little things I look at it as self-care, right? I be it ever so humble, there's no place like home, right? And to have a cozy space, to have calmness, to have little things of beauty, or the things that bring you joy, or just to be able to just appreciate and have a sanctuary in your home, I think helps to balance out everything. And if I can just add one more thing, is that and I share with you that I have a part-time job, and I work with some really great people who do some really important work. But one person went out to have surgery, a major surgery, and something that I would think that would take maybe 6 to 8 weeks, they were back in 2.5. And they're boomer, okay? They're boomers. And they kind of see that as a badge of courage. Like, look, I dragged my
Your
partially
half dead body.
half dead
Back to
body
the word.
in, and and I'm gonna, I'm like, and I'm looking at them, and I'm like, what kind of insanity is this?
I think that's just a US thing. I honestly do,
But it's
because like the
insane.
U it is a little it's odd.
No, it's
Um,
insane.
well, I don't wanna say insane, because it's like it's just systematically throughout our country, we have this sort of like, "Work is the best thing you can do, work, no
That
rest."
is
And so,
insane.
if we can't all be insane, right? So, it's our norm here.
It's not normal.
But it's not normal, but we embrace it here.
It
And
is
because like
insane to sacrifice your body for a job that next week might say you are no longer needed. That's insane.
well, it's also Americans don't, and US, because America could also be Canada too, but US citizens don't take as many vacations, they don't take as many PTO days, because they're and if you ask them, they wanna be good employees, but underneath that is this underlying fear. If I actually take my days, they might think I'm lazy. They might fire me. They might not believe I'm worth being at the job. And then there's something else, which someone uh, there's this other thing too, that they can't survive without me, because we are so tied to our work and our jobs that it becomes like the pie in the sky, like the most important thing. And you can't imagine, well, if I go on a 4-week vacation, how could they survive without me? And if I go on a 4-week vacation and they survive without me, well, then they might think that they could survive without me. So I'm just not going to take vacation. And I know someone like this who is, they've reached retirement age, and their biggest thing, the biggest thing they're like proud of, um, is that they have like over 2,000 hours of like sick and PTO time, which will just disappear when they retire. Which is, to me, that's not even like you lost your body, but like that's money. Like those are days when you could have been off and you would have been paid. Like there's no reward, or they're not going to give you the award for like thanks for not taking PTO. They're just going to be like thanks. Like they don't care. But that's a lot of time. It's like a crap load of time.
It is. And so I think, again, I think that with everything that is going on, it is an opportunity for us to build a different kind of society. And I think that, I think putting, I used to think, I used to think about work 24/7,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I just did. And now when I leave the doors of, that job, I do my best not to think about it. And if I do, like, let's say I'm getting ready in the morning, I'm taking a shower or whatever, and I'm starting to think and plot and plan, I stop myself, because worrying about work used to keep me up at night. It would wake me up. And I would go through a list of things that I'm supposed to do, or need to do this or need to do that or whatever. And then I got to the point where I said, they're not paying me for this time, right? So if I ain't getting paid for it, I'm not giving you my mental capacity. I'm not letting you take up space in my brain, for this, because it is just stress. There's the same, I think, therefore I am. For Americans, I work, therefore I am, right?
I love what we're talking about right now, so I wanna go a little deeper into that. Um, so we're talking a little bit about we're talking about how Americans work, like it is their only thing that they have in life. And so how many times have others, because I know we have some listeners, how many times have you felt like you've sacrificed something for work, and maybe it didn't get the return that you thought? Because I know I like looking back at the end of my lifespan at a job. I remember I was like, I'm gonna be available to the staff. I want to be that administrator who like I'm there for you. And at the end of that time at that job, what came out of that was that my kids felt like my job was much more important than them. So, one of the things I would remind us when we're so focused on work, we're also kind of probably not giving our best or remembering the people in our personal life, like our family, our friends. How many times have, for the love of the job, people sacrificed a weekend or to be good employers, to be, quote, good leaders? Are we holding ourselves to an unattainable standard? And I do also realize heading into a recession that, or I don't want to say recession because we're not allowed to say that yet, right? But heading into some economic,
Uncertainty, brother.
uncertainty, many people will go harder at their jobs because they want to seem more valuable. They want to show their value. So this is really a good time to be talking about this, because with job insecurity, this is a time I feel like employers often take advantage of the staff that they have, with sort of this fear of like, because no one can afford really to lose a job, right? Like unless you're at retirement age. Or can you shift and think about different ways to work? I know when COVID hit and there were a lot of companies that did not have work from home, we saw a lot of people shift to like self run businesses and small businesses, that shift towards, well, maybe I can do something else versus working for a large corporation. Will we see a shift towards that? And I'll throw this out there. I think the tariffs are going to prevent some of that because if you're shifting towards a small business and you're selling anything, a lot of times those shifts to small businesses involve selling, like being resellers. I wasn't going to talk about that because that's not a happy thing. I know small business resellers, because of tariffs, are losing tons of money hand over fist. But I do think we need to explore, how do employees keep their health, their resilience, and their selves in this economic uncertainty, where I feel like employers are going to take advantage of our work ethic in the US, and two, we feel very insecure. We still need to rest though. How are we going to hold those boundaries as employees? So,
And
any thoughts out there from people on the line? Thoughts for how to hold our boundaries? Because this is, like, I'm throwing that out there. This could be a time where employers take advantage of this feeling of crisis that employees have, saying, like, hey, you need to work overtime, or, I need you to stay. Um, like, how are we gonna hold ourselves to keeping ourselves healthy?
the conversation started today, for those who joined, is talking about rest right now, in a time of that where things are really sort of chaotic and there's a lot of uncertainty and fear. I'm choosing to take make time for rest. And I think one of the things, I'm doing some focus groups at my job. And one of the people who participated said that, their spouse is like, are you going to work now again? Right? You're at home. And I thought to myself, and I know this person works very hard. They're very dedicated to their family. And I just would like to see a society that, again, when I talk about my little vegetable garden, that the sun, the values that we lean towards and lean into, like a growing plant leans towards the light, is something that really sustains life, that sustains health, that sustains wellness, that sustains balance, that sustains joy. I mean, nobody ever looks at their life and said, what's your goal in life? Well, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to own a house, or I want to have a business. Very few people say, what's your goal in life? To be joyous. Imagine.
Well, you know what? It's funny you said that. My nephew, when he was younger, probably 10 or 11, he's now 13. When my brother asked him, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He said, "Happy." And my brother, in a conversation with me, he was like, "Can you believe this kid doesn't have any aspirations? He
Right.
doesn't want anything out of life. He didn't say a job." Because, he was expecting him to say, "I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be wealthy, whatever." He said, "I want to be happy." And it was, I think back to that time and I feel like I also was like, "Oh, that's weird. He said he wanted to be happy." And then I was like, I thought about it more and I was like, you know what? Being happy would be a wonderful thing to be. But at first I was like, yeah, what kind of lazy, like, what is he talking about? He wants to be happy. We all want to be happy, but we got to get a job. Like, and I definitely was right there with my brother. And now I think about it post that conversation. I'm like, well, that's a great goal. Now at 13, he wants to be rich.
Mm.
So somewhere between 10 or 11 and 13, he became a part of that. Like, the system has told you, you don't want to be happy. You want to make a lot of money, because if you make a lot of money, that is the only way that you might be happy, because you could take some days off. And I said, "Oh, you want to be rich?" And he said, "Yeah, mom said I should be an anesthesiologist. I'm going to be a doctor."
Okay.
And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Why an anesthesiologist?" And he said, "Money." And
Mm.
so different from the 10-year-old he was. he's wonderfully smart, and he probably will be an anesthesiologist if that is what he wants to be. But it doesn't really seem like it. And I remember something similar as a kid. Like I started to get more into like what the adults were doing, which was like you got to work hard, you got to get a job, you got to do this, you got to be responsible. And I do think like the best like kids probably have a lot of smartness about that. Like we should be aiming for more joy and happiness.
We should be
Um,
aiming for. I had a friend when I was, growing up. She said to my mother and myself, my mother, who was my first coach, what do you want to be, when you grow up, right? And she said happy, and both of us had this visceral, like, oh my God, what is this, right? But here's the thing: who wants to live a life that's not happy? Is there any value in living an unhappy life? You
well,
know,
and it's interesting how when we think of the term rich, right? I wanna have
we equate
richness or
that
I
with
wanna we
happiness.
do. And most of the time what we're really talking about is money, right? Like it's not happiness and rich doesn't equal money unless unless their name is rich and they're like really fun. Um, I
What
did
we're,
know a
re-
fun rich.
what we're really talking about is options, right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily money. I'm not saying that money is a bad thing, right? But what people really want is they want options. They want the option. I want the option to be able to live where I want to live. I want the option to be able to vacation where I want to vacation. I want the option to work as many hours as I want to or not work as many hours. I want options. Money buys you options,
It
right?
does.
And but that's not what people think about, because there's a way of creating options without having to be very rich. Again, I'm not saying anything about folks being rich, right? I'm not bashing that, but I'm just saying that, and I think that's a part of the problems that we see today, right? Folks have voted, for billionaires, somehow thinking that there's a chance for them to be a billionaire too. And it's called 1% for a reason, right? Not everybody makes it into that club. The 99% is probably where you're going to land, right? But still, that hope of that feeling that, if I have more money, I'm going to be happy. But look at these billionaires. Do they look happy to you? No, there is a beautiful goal in life to be happy. And a part of being happy is taking care of your body, which I have not always done. And I don't necessarily do a good job now, right? Trying. I don't use the word trying, making habit changes, but also just rest. As a person that, because my nervous system was fried, I've had chronic insomnia for years. I've spent a good portion of the last decade or more exhausted, like zombified. And and now I'm just like, no, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to rest. I'm going to turn off the social media. I'm not going to click on that because that's going to spiral me into stress. And I keep up. I always keep up with what's going on, and I keep up with what's important. But in this time, I've had to decide, well, what's important to me. And I think it's important for everyone to really figure out what's important for their lives, right? What are your values, right? If your values are one of the things that we don't oftentimes value, and unfortunately, it doesn't happen. It's happening, I think, with younger people because they see what older generations have gone through. But I follow this one content creator who talks about life hours. How many life hours am I going to have to spend working to pay for this cell phone? Or how many life hours am I going to have to pay to pay for that Porsche that's sitting out in my garage? Or how many life hours am I going to have to sacrifice and trade for things, right? And when you start to think about life hours, and I'm not young, I'm older, right? So time has
We look fantastic. I don't know, we
fantastic.
are older,
Hello,
but we look
hello.
fantastic.
I do
Um,
not hesitate to tell people that I'm 25. You know what I'm saying? I I don't. I'm not ashamed of my age, okay? No, but the more time goes on, and you know that you've got less time in front of you than you do in back of you start to
You get a
think
little selfish with your time.
you're not selfish.
I'm selfish with my time.
What you do is you become more critical in your thinking about where you want to spend your time and what brings you joy.
Mm.
And even in what I'm learning through this process is even in the midst of chaos, and for some people this is not chaotic, for other people this is, right? But even in the midst of uncertainty and chaos, you can carve out, is I think it's essential to carve out times of joy. And my mind goes back to times of slavery, right? And where slaves sang, right, and they told stories and things of this nature. Even in the midst of slavery, there seemed to have been something that helped them to carry on and to bring some measure of joy. If you read Man's Search for Meaning, about Viktor Frankl wrote that book, and he talks about his time in a concentration camp. He talks about the things that the mind has to do in order to survive some of the most atrocious times, right? And so I think it's so important for us to just find whatever little thing it is that brings us some measure of peace and joy to help us to withstand the winds that are coming at us right now.
And I agree completely with that. I'm also going to throw this out there. I think now is the time for us to begin to make partnerships with people that we know at work, to collaborate more, because I don't want to lie to people. I think economically things are going to get tough. And when things get tough economically, businesses do tighten up the belt. And I think sometimes they lean towards layoffs when perhaps there is another different way for even employers to go. Could you do you need extra work, or you need extra things, or you realize you're going to be taking on more hours? Could you do partnerships with that? Could you share across employee groups the work so that there's still rest and it's done in a different and more efficient way? Because we know in every organization there's some type of waste, because the person who's probably doing the project isn't the best person to be doing the project. So could you look at being more intellectually efficient? Could you have like team shares where if people have to have time off or they need to have time off, how does that work? Do you have coverage for them? I
Well,
think when, like, what I'm saying here is more that when employees get together and they do their own self-managing of, like, here's the expectation coming from the the leader group, right? So how can we as employees, because we know how we work best and we understand the dynamics, how can we have a seat at the table and weigh in? Well, here's what would really work. Because sometimes managers don't know that piece. Here's how we can efficiently do this without us cutting anybody out of the job.
well, here's the thing. There's a couple of things going on because I've worked in the HR realm of things. One is that most organizations are not thinking that, like, and I was in a meeting yesterday, and I made the comment that when most of the time when you greet people, within the organization, you say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Busy, 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 but busy is good, right? And I'm like, well, no, busy is okay if you're busy doing the right things, right? But busy for the sake of busy, and that's what a lot of organizations and companies are based on: busy for the sake of being, busy. If I'm stressed, it must be good, right? And then also, here's the other thing too. Now, stopping to think about the reality of, I've spent a lot of time in the nonprofit organizations, nonprofit realm. So it's not like you're always heavily staffed. Chances are you're probably short staffed, right? And so
Oh,
people are
100%.
doing more than then really probably is humanly possible in a lot of ways. And then when you bring in and corporate and capitalist kind of mindset, it's like, how much work can we get out of you with paying you only enough to keep you from quitting, right? And so the environment of work does not incorporate even rest, right? I've heard people say, well, and I'm guilty of it myself, a lunch, right? Do I take lunch? I eat and work at the same time. I'm guilty of that. It's so important to take a moment away to enjoy your meal. If you are one of the fortunate people on this planet that has food and plenty of it to eat, and if you are a good cook like I am, you need to savor that meal, right? And to enjoy it and to be present while you eat it, right? The work that we do, the life that we live, does not encourage us to be present. What it encourages us to do is to get through this moment so we can do this and we can do that and we can do this, but never ever present in this moment. And so we live a life in the future chasing after things with no respite, right? We don't allow our brains to rest. We always have something going on, earplugs, earbuds in, TV going, podcast going, radio going. We've got constant stimulation, and we never allow our nervous system, our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our souls, a moment of peace and rest. We never do. And then if you throw in health concerns, family concerns, societal concerns, we are just inundated with so many things that keep our cortisol levels up, keep us in a high stress fight and flight reality, and it is exhausting. And I'm opting out of that. I do not know how this experiment ends.
But how can we teach ourselves to collaborate more and share the burden of what's going to be, trying times, right? So I don't, to be honest, I don't like team projects. But the one thing I do acknowledge about team projects is they, when done well, they help to share the burden of whatever you're working on. When parsed out efficiently, versus just like, oh, you're going to take this part, you're going to take this part. I think sometimes employees themselves understand or know who would be maybe better to do this piece of the work than someone else. I've worked on projects where it's literally just been like, well, you guys take this half and you guys take that half. No thought to like, here's the skill set, because we all come to the table with or for that project came to the table with similar skill sets, but some of our strengths maybe were things that, like, there's always that person who does Excel better than anybody else. I named Excel, which is an old, like, thing. But there's always someone who the team knows or people know do the thing better than other people and could get through it faster. So, like, how are we sharing those resources and how are we sharing those knowledge holders so that we're not all working like inefficiently? Um,
If
so that's a lot. I'm just saying we probably need to learn how to collaborate a little bit more than we're already doing. Because
I,
what I see is like departments being gotten rid of and then that work just dumped on someone else. Could we collaborate differently so that there's less of that going on? And I'm not talking about the federal government here. Layoffs in the federal government, that has nothing to do with the collaboration piece. That's just something separate. I'm talking about private industry and how they're going to handle the upcoming financial challenges.
well,
Even though we were talking about rest, because I want people to be able to rest. And I do feel like they're going to think they can rest or they're going to rest less because we're stressed right now, worrying about the economy.
I think that, well, here's the thing. We've got a different generation coming into the workforce, and they don't necessarily ascribe to what older folks have ascribed to. And I think really there is going to be a work revolution. Okay.
I'm
Because
for that too.
they,
Or do
because
or we learn to say no. That's
yeah,
the other thing we
well,
could
they
do.
are saying no, and they say no with a quit. They they don't come back, and we're facing that in the work that we do. They don't, they don't come back. They
So what do they d so I'm just curious, so what do they do when they don't come back? Because I know what people
they
were doing
find a new job.
at another place,
Yeah,
and
they find a new job, and also too, we're
and 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 jobs are out there at the frontline area,
yeah,
like, for frontline people.
but also too, things have changed, right? When a lot of folks from past generations, when they turn 18, boom, they're out of the house, they're gone, right? They leave
Mm.
their parents' home and they're on their own. Well, generations coming up, because of the realities of
The
the expense
economy.
of yes, the economy, right? They're at home. So if I don't like a job, then I'm not going to force myself to stay there. I'm still at home, right? I don't have the overhead. I don't have, and here's the thing. To be really honest with you, I used to tell a friend of mine, her daughter, because her mom had an apartment in the basement, which was really nice apartment. I was like, if I were you, I would never leave. Okay, I would not. That apartment would be mine after I got of age. I would never leave home. If I knew what I knew now, I'd still be in my mother's womb. I wouldn't have never left, right? And I'm kind of excited about the times, the times we're in that now you're starting to see multiple generations within, still living within a
Which
house.
is
It
collaboration. Like,
is
I think we need
collaboration.
to whether it's work, where you're working and your family, like, friends, I would love to see, and I've talked to you about this, more people buying, like, pooling their money together and buying property and setting up beautiful little gardens there and having some chickens or whatever. But, like, I think we're gonna have to get through whatever is coming next, or even just this could be the way of the future. We're going to need to share the 99% that don't have $1 billion are going to need to learn to love each other a little differently and better and share resources. We're going to have to share our resources. Um, and, because if it like, I think I read something that in Philly back in, I wanna say the '70s, maybe, a house was like 30,000, or I mean, it probably wasn't even that much, but, like, the salary allowed you to purchase that house. The salary, like, my house, I can't imagine who would buy my house if, like, I sold it, because like, I look at what it says on that, like, Zillow or whatever, and I'm like, "That's a wild amount." 'Cause I remember when do you remember when they would say, like, your housing should only be, what is it, like a third of your income? There's no way that the price of my house is the third of anyone's. Maybe it is.
You
Um,
know, I'm sorry.
I bought my house a long time ago, by the way.
But you know what? Here's the thing. It's really nuts. I was looking at the New York Times the other day, and they had some houses listed, right? 300. I mean, 3,000, 4,000 square feet or whatever, $699,000. But they had a small, like a apartment or condo or whatever, that was 600,000 too. And I thought it was like 1,300 square feet, 1,800 square feet, something like that. And I thought to myself, what kind of world am I living in? I would never be able to afford a home now, right? And so I follow a lot of content creators that do permaculture, who do, you know, um, some communal land or whatever. And I was listening to this one person the other day who said, instead of each of us having a lawnmower, just for example, we only need one and we can share it, right? And I think younger generations they are more tapped into a life of ease, and that makes old people really angry because it's like, you're supposed to be a part of the psychosis that has made us great, right? And they're like, no, this is crazy. I'm not doing that, right? And so they create things just like all generations do. They create new ways of doing things throughout history. They've done that. But no, I'm not going to buy something new. I'm going to go to Poshmark, right? And I'm going to get somebody else's stuff that is new to me.
Thrifting stores are like blowing up around me.
Thrifting.
Like,
So
yeah.
my mother thrifted. When you got a growing kid, how am I going to keep you in clothes? Yeah, we she was a great shopper, right? But tool sharing, right? There are tool sharing sites out there. There's trading sites out there. There are ways of doing things now that don't require you to spend every life hour that you have working or being stressed or being owned, right? And because today's conversations, for those who are just joining us, it's about rest. Resting in a time of turmoil, resting in your
How to find
life,
those things
just
for joy.
finding greater levels of joy. I want to be happy. I want to have joy in my life.
For those that are listening or following, how many of you are thinking about like I've seen these like share pods, right? Like you get together and you share resources, like you were saying, like a lawnmower, like uh, big resources that maybe you wouldn't buy. Those are things that I think we have to start thinking about. I also thought about the other day the fact that in my little neighborhood, it often was families or groups that knew each other that would, buy houses on the same block. How many of us have thought about doing that or moving to areas and just taking over those areas to do these collaborative pods? I know I share some resources with my neighbor down the corner, and like my neighbor next door. It's almost like returning to those, like asking, I don't think I would ever go to a neighbor's house and say, "Do you have a cup of sugar?" But if we think about that mentality, we were much more open to like sharing versus individual ownership of things. Like even sharing clothes, like borrowing clothes with like relatives and things seems to have gone a little bit out of favor. Like that chronic, like need to buy something new fast market stuff. So Melania talked a little bit about thrifting and how we could return to thrifting. But I do think that we have to get open to the idea of sharing more. Like if I physically can't do the planting of a garden, could I share that garden? Like I get the seeds because I have the fiscal ability to get the seeds, but my neighbor, maybe their kid helps to like plant the seeds and we share in that garden. Like that's where I think we need to get creative and innovative, and it will help us to have that joy too, because there's something joyful about interacting with
Um,
real people. I mean, I don't like people. So like I have a little bit of social awkwardness. I am autistic. So I'm saying all this stuff and then like in person I would probably have to high mask to do it. But like I do love the idea of community, and when it works out well, it does feel joyful.
it,
Um
it
I don't
does.
want to stress anybody and be like, "Hey, join my pod of sharing tools." I have a Sawzall though. That's a wonderful saw to have. So
Well, it's so funny.
and Melania's trying to plant that garden. She has no idea what to do with the beans.
But
So
here's the thing. Last week, I had my neighbor last week. I got two Happy Meals, and I call them Happy Meals. She cooked too much and brought me dinner twice last week. And home cooked meals that I didn't have to cook, right? And I just think about a community, a street that operates like that. Again, you may live on a street where there's a single mom that works and is taking care of her child or multiple children. What a blessing it would be, right? Because we're talking about rest, right? What a blessing
yeah,
it would be to ring the doorbell and say, "Hey, I thought about you. I made you dinner. You can have it any day this week, or you can freeze this. Bon appetit," right? Just and maybe that was a day that mother or that father, that single parent was exhausted. And it's like, well, thank you. We're going to, you know what, we're going to eat, and maybe we'll play a game afterwards, and we're going to have a serendipitous, restful evening, right? I mean, that's the kind of the silliness that, hey, Eunice, that's the kind of silliness that I'm talking about, right? And hey, Sandy, thank you. A cooperative life that leads to rest and joy. I mean, that's what and my friend Eunice, who tuned in, I told, we were talking one day, and said, I said, I used to, I said, she used to say, oh, Melonya, you were always so calm and so peaceful. And I'm like, well, who am I now? She goes, raging bull. And I was like, you're right. Then I don't want to be that girl. I don't. I want to be the peaceful, centered person that I was pretending to be back then. I wasn't. I was all up in my head and crazy, but only I knew that, right? But I want to be that person again. And during these times, it's really difficult to find that centeredness, but I think it's so necessary.
Absolutely necessary. We are at the hour, so I'm gonna close us out.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Just to recap, we talked about, how do we find rest? How do we create joy? Um, we talked about collaboration is gonna be very important moving forward. I hope that people are this could be a challenge, like, meet a neighbor. I have a neighbor who brings me cookies, like, and is so thoughtful. He's so thoughtful. He makes nut-free cookies and then nut cookies for me, because my son has a nut allergy. He doesn't even live with me anymore, my son, but he still brings cookies. So he's such a nice neighbor for doing that. I also have a neighbor who there's a neighbor on my block where they share dog walking. And they like, which would be awesome, right? Like someone who walks a dog in the afternoon, someone like, but they're retired nurses, and they walk each other's dogs. They rotate, so
That's
that nobody,
beautiful.
yeah, that's beautiful. So stories like that, love to hear stories like that. Um, and this was such a great conversation. Thank you, for bringing it up. And we love everybody who listens to us, everybody who tunes in. We're gonna close it out, and we'd love to hear if you implement any of those things or do something different. Send us a message.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's it. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us on MT Fridays. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more insightful discussions every Friday. Remember, the brain drain stops here, so keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media or visiting our website. Until next time, stay curious and keep filling your mind with knowledge. See you next week, Friday, on MT Fridays.